You know what? Long polling is so brilliant. Your server is dying 1000 users hitting the refresh every 5 seconds. That's 12,000 requests per minute for absolutely nothing. And here's what's crazy. There's a solution that has been lying in front of us for a long time. For example, Kafka uses their approach to handle millions of messages. So today we are going to talk about it. Let's see how to dramatically reduce the server load by using something as simple as long polling. If we think about it, the traditional polling is basically the same idea of kind of like doing the refresh, but a bit better. Because basically, we are defining a given frequency that will ask, for example, an API if there's something there that has changed and look into the state. If nothing has changed, we ask again after a few seconds. For example, after 5 seconds, we ask again. Traditional polling is also known as short polling. This approach often results in excessive network traffic, is what we call chattiness. Okay, there's a lot of chatting going on between the server and the client. The difference is that you are not going through that complete load of an application, but basically it's the same idea in terms of the checking the status of that request, for example, seeing if something is changed is exactly the same idea. Refresh, 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 try again. A new request that goes and comes back, and eventually something has changed, maybe not. More often than not, nothing has changed. There's many problems with traditional polling. For example, generates unnecessary traffic. It's resource intensive due to the many empty requests. Is not scalable, especially problematic with those thousands of clients always asking for something, and has a huge toll on your database with many queries being executed. But what's the problem with that? The problem is the pointless database queries. The server costs go through the roof, your user's phone battery, for example, start dying, and this costs you money and it's ruining the user experience, to be honest. And while there's other options to avoid the problems of polling, things like, for example, server-sent events, WebSockets, there's something beauty in the simplicity of long polling. So let's take a look. Basically, long polling will shift the approach. Instead of every 5 seconds asking for updates, for example, do you got anything? Do you got anything? Do you got anything? Every few seconds and nothing changed, we'll change the approach. We'll flip it to something like, tell me please when you have something new, when something has changed. Tell me when you have something for me. With long polling, the backend will wait for the data to be ready or a timeout occurs. This will significantly reduce unnecessary network traffic. That will reduce the backend load and improve the scalability by avoiding many repeated empty checks. It's those repeated empty checks that we want to avoid. And those are a huge problem with traditional polling. Always opening a connection to do those empty checks. So let's use an analogy from the real world to picture this clearly. For example, you go to a coffee shop. You don't go to the counter and ask every 10 seconds if they have the coffee ready for you. They will ask for your name. They will call for your name, or they will bring it to your table, depending where you are. For example, imagine that Starbucks experience. Is that the idea? And why do I think that long polling is so brilliant? Because it's basically standard HTTP. There's no fancy protocols involved. It's basically async await. You already are familiar with it, so just use it. The benefits is that it will reduce your requests maybe in 90%. Instead of having to do all of those asks, you'll have a long request that eventually will have a response. Think about it in terms of code in the following way. In the traditional polling, you will basically loop through until the moment that you have the answer that you are looking for, always checking for updates, and you wait for a while, you check for updates. It's a constant hammering of your system. While in long polling, you will basically perform a single request and wait for the response. You have a cancellation token. In case something goes wrong, you need to abort that request, something times out. So it's basically that. One request, it waits, it's done. If you open the network tab on those cases, what you will see is that in the traditional polling, it will show you a request every 5 seconds. Request, 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 request. Long polling, you see one request sitting there waiting patiently. Then you have cancellation tokens for things like timeouts. That's it. Simple. It's a simple idea using technology that is battle tested. So, where to use this? For example, notifications. While there's something like SignalR that is an amazing technology, I absolutely love it. For some simple use cases of notifications, it might be enough to use long polling. E-commerce order tracking. Instead of having all of those refreshes, having your client always refreshing to see the status changing, try to use long polling, for example. Background job monitoring. Things like Hangfire, Azure Functions, whatever. You can use long polling to track the status of those jobs that are running. Financial dashboards, for example, having that real-time information coming without that spam of always requesting for information. When we want a scalable and reliable backend, it's quite common to use something like a queue, a messaging system. So we send a request to the queue, to the messaging system, and it will be processed afterwards. That way, we can handle those traffic spikes. Using long polling combined with those queues is a great strategy to keep your client informed and also delaying that requests handling for later in order to have your system reliable and scalable. So, quick question. In your applications nowadays, where are you using that traditional polling, that dumb polling? Please leave a comment. I would love to hear from you. In the beginning of this video, I mentioned Kafka, Apache Kafka. I know. And let me tell one thing. Kafka is amazing. It scales brilliantly. It can handle millions of messages and is a well-known technology for applications under extreme load, and it's extremely efficient. And part of the reason comes from this strategy of the long polling. While in some cases it might look like magic, it's not. It's just using long polling, taking advantage of TCP connections. Basically, consumers will ask for messages, wait for X milliseconds, and return even if empty. Same principle as what you are building. Hold the connection open, minimize the round trips, stop wasting resources. It can reduce 90% of the API calls. This is a real number, let me tell you. Let me give you some tips based on my experience in .NET. So one thing that you need to take a look is into memory leaks, okay? If you are not disposing things like the cancellation token source, for example, it might become a problem. Other thing that it's common to happen is to have problems with something like a load balancer. For example, you are using Azure App Gateway and there's a timeout for the TCP connection, and that can cause some problems. What do you need to do? Adjust the settings of your infrastructure, be familiar with your infrastructure, and deal with it. So when should you use what? As always, it depends. But when should you use something like long polling or traditional polling? When should you use something like server-sent events, WebSockets, using technologies like SignalR, for example? It depends, but let's take a look. For example, for long polling, it's great for a simple real-time that you want to have. You want to take advantage of the existing HTTP connections. You want it to update every X seconds, for example, to update the status, for example. Long polling is a great option for that. While, for example, server-sent events is great for those continuous streams of data. Data is always flowing in one way, okay? And also, it takes advantage of a built-in reconnection that you don't have with long polling. WebSockets, in other hand, they are bidirectional. They have high frequency, and for interactive apps that you want to keep that connection and exchange data both ways, they are great. So as you can see, there's a use case for all of them, but when compared to something like traditional polling, often long polling is more than enough. Always keep in mind that the best solution isn't always the newest one or the fancy one. Sometimes it's the basics that it's already there. It's taking advantage of the existing protocols, okay? But approaching it in a different way. So I hope you find this interesting and that you start looking at long polling as an option, as something that you can use in your day-to-day to improve your existing systems. And if you like this video, I believe you will like this one as well. And I will see you in the next one.